Hello everyone, in this episode of Motive Garage, we put our GR Yaris onto the dyno for some testing and head to the drag strip. Now, in the previous episode of Motive Garage, you will have seen that we fitted up the Tuner's Edge catback exhaust and K&N panel filter before we went to Wakefield, and it did seem to be worth a couple of tenths around the track compared to other Yarises that went around the track on the same tyres. Now, we decided that we would then take it to Red Sun Motorsport to put on the dyno to see if we could measure that increase in performance. Now, you will notice the car does a colour change halfway through this episode. Why? Well, we got the same people who wrapped the Supra to wrap it in the same colour. And we think Tint and Protect did an epic job, and we love the fact that our two little GR Toyotas are now matchy-matchy and look pretty cool together and do turn a lot of heads when driving around. Now, we actually did our dyno test in reverse. We already had the catback and K&N panel filter, so we dynoed it in that configuration first. Then we put the stock catback exhaust system back on and then the stock filter back in and dynoed it that way. But we will show the results, obviously in order of stock, then into modified. Now, it all sounds pretty simple, but it actually wasn't on the dyno with the GR Yaris. We first dynoed the car in 5th gear because it's the closest to 1-to-1, and we found that we had, well, some very strange issues. The car was introducing a rev limiter way lower than factory, more so as the car got hotter. So instead of revving to 7,200, by the time we did 2 or 3 runs, it wouldn't let us rev past 6,000 RPM. Was it torque limiting? Was it speed limiting? We still don't know. It didn't actually reach that speed that it should have, but it kept introducing a weird artificial limiter. So we dynoed the car in 4th gear instead so that we could get some clean runs. Let's check it out. We performed some runs back-to-back, plus other runs after letting it cool down a little, as the car suffers immensely from heat soak. Intake air temps would rise from 30 degrees to over 60 degrees after 3 runs back-to-back on the dyno, making it rather difficult to get consistent runs. We saw as high as 182 kilowatts on the first run when cold, but as low as 161 kilowatts after heat soak with the stock exhaust. Fitting the K&N filter, it was hard to get an accurate reading to determine if there was any power increase. Now to run again with the Tuner's Edge catback exhaust. With the catback exhaust, we saw a lowest of 164 and a highest of 182 kilowatts, both of which are essentially throwaway runs, but it seemed the averages were ever so slightly up, but it's very hard to tell and prove it. So we've since spoken to a few other people that have dynoed their GR Yaris with a catback exhaust system, and they pretty much had the same result as us. Some people got no increase in horsepower they could measure, some might have got 5 horsepower that they could measure either in the mid-range or up top, but overall it's too inconsistent to kind of really tell just how much power it actually makes extra. However, the same people have had increases in performance in the real world. Now, we had a couple of tenths at Wakefield, but a few people have said that the cars have gone 1 or 2 mile per hour quicker on average when they test the acceleration with the Draggy, including Arthur from Tuner's Edge. Now, when it comes to the K&N panel filter, well, we've had very good results with them in the past, but with this, just can't get consistent enough to see exactly how much extra power there is available. But overall, we can't argue with the fact that with the K&N panel filter and the catback, the car sounds better and we are getting a little bit more real-world performance. But most importantly, it sounds so much better than stock, which sounds like a vacuum cleaner. Now, after all that, you saw in a previous episode, we fitted up the Golby's parts dump pipe and front pipe, so let's see how that goes. With the first run and last runs being throwaways, we saw overall that the car had an increase in power of approximately 10 kilowatts or a little over 13 horsepower through most of the rev range. All right, so looking at some of the runs here, we've got this weird power curve up top that is basically not explainable unless we have complete logging of everything in the ECU. Really all we can guesstimate is as it makes more power, you can see here it's got sort of 10, 12, even 15 kilowatts through the mid-range difference. It gets up to sort of where it peaks in power here. It looks like the ECU tries to pull boost or power out of it or timing or whatever it's pulling out, and then it pulls a bit out. In one of these runs quite a lot, but then weirdly on the dyno it kind of does what it does on the road, and then the last sort of 1,000 RPM it sort of gets that power back where the original factory dump and front pipe had this nice hump of mid-range here, but then would start to taper off. So obviously the ECU just is either seeing increased torque or increased boost or increased power, and it wants to pull that power out here. But the best thing is, if you have a look at even sort of the average of some of these runs, you can see that the original run with original exhaust at sort of 166, and our good runs here of sort of 176, 177, that power increases from when we start the run all the way through the mid-range until we get higher in the RPM range before we have that sort of little weird dip at about 6.5 or 6 to 6,500 RPM, and then the last sort of 500 to 1,000 RPM we get sort of some power back. So the other thing we noticed is our very first run of 185, we saw the intake air temp go up from 30 to over 40. The second run was still high 170s. We noticed the intake air temp stayed below 50. As soon as the intake air temp went over 50 degrees, which was the third run, that's when we started seeing the drop in power. And basically, as the intake air temp climbed up to closer to 60 degrees, that's where we lost the power. So this car desperately needs an intercooler that can keep the intake air temps below 50 degrees. As soon as it goes over 50 degrees intake air temp, you just lose heaps of power. But overall, we do have a good 10 kilowatt increase on our averages from the full exhaust system. It does make better power up top, but we just have this little weird dip here that we're going to try and need to sort out. We decided to head back to Red Sun's dyno a couple of days later with cooler temperatures, 22 degrees compared to 34 degrees previously. Now, Yaris is back on the dyno at Red Sun to do some more product testing. And after discussing the problem with the power reduction up at the top end of the rev range before it comes back and discussing whether it's torque management or not, we decided we should dyno the car in third gear. And what we found now is we can always get a clean pass in third gear on the dyno. Now, we're aware that third gear will obviously make more power because it's not loaded up as much and different gear ratio, but it's not a ridiculous increase in power. But what matters is we can get clean dyno runs. So we've found now with the exhaust system on that we can get a clean pass. It's cooler temperatures today as well. So we saw as much as 201 kilowatts, then it dropped to 198, and then it dropped to 195 kilowatts. But we get a nice clean run as well. So basically, if we want to keep testing the car on this dyno, we're going to have to now do it in third gear just purely so we get a clean run. Because in fourth and fifth, it keeps bringing in artificial limiters, it keeps reducing power, keeps mucking around with the car. Does it do it on the road? Well, I'll find out soon enough, or at least try to. But for now, that's what we've discovered that we need to do with our Yaris to get a good, clean dyno run. Now, if you watched our day job race ready feature on the Yaris, you would have seen that we removed 70 kilos out of the car to get it into race trim. Well, that combined with a bit of extra grunt, I figured I might as well take it to Sydney Dragway on an Aeroflow race for real Wednesday night and see just how quick it is down the drag strip, plus have a little bit of fun. Now, you think being a little light all-wheel drive car would be easy, right? Well, the car certainly made me work for it. run was 13.3 at 105. To be honest with you, it's just not 60. It was a 199 to the 60. Guys are doing 1.8s in these things, no problem, at other tracks. So I just keep trying new stuff. So a 199 to the 60, 13.3, and then 105. So at least mile an hour is okay, which obviously proves the weight out and the power is working. But I just need to get it to launch a little bit better and then drive it more aggressively to get a decent time out of it, I think.
Oh, got it! 32!
So it appears my biggest problem compared to other Yarises out there is it's just not 60. Why? Don't know. Can't tell you. I'm going to try launching less aggressively next time. Maybe that's what it is. It's hard to say, but I'm only getting a 196 to the 60, which is pretty crap to be honest. But that one was a 13.2 at 106. So mile an hour is like now starting to look okay-ish. But yeah, it's just the ET to go that mile an hour is terrible. I'd rather see more like a 1.8. And if we saw a 1.8, we'd be into the 12s, no worries. But yeah, we're way off being near the front of the pack with the Yaris. But mind you, we've only done an exhaust and some weight reduction. So, but yeah, I'm not launching very well. Simple as that. Okay, on that run, 195.60, so pretty much the same, maybe slightly better, but didn't have to pedal it at all in first through clutch slip or wheel spin or whatever, and went 13.0 at 107.96, so better. Well, the little GR Yaris was harder than I thought it would be to get down the quarter mile. If it wasn't a clutch problem, there was even wheel spin problems with it. And no doubt there's hundreds of people commenting right now about how eCanoe's stock one did a 12.8. But let's face it, that's the track or rally pack or whatever you want to call it from overseas that has LSDs front and rear. I don't know what the conditions were over there compared to ours, but it doesn't really matter. One in Melbourne has gone 12.6s as well, but we built this to go around the circuit and we're not too fussed about what it does at the drag strip. We may come back to focusing on the drag strip once we have a rear LSD and some extra power, but for now we have one priority, and that is to be the quickest GR Yaris around Wakefield. But overall, a 13 flat at 107, that's pretty impressive for what this car is. Just a bit of weight out, better tyres and an exhaust system. That's it. So it's doing pretty well for what it is. But make sure you subscribe and stay tuned as we go to Wakefield in our next episode to try and be the quickest GR Yaris around a track.